So today we're going to talk a little bit about lotus posture, because I got this funny question in the gym the other day. Somebody saw me doing lotus and they were like, does that hurt? And I was like, no, no. But when we first start practicing lotus posture, it can be uncomfortable. And so lotus posture, let's start with why bother? Lotus posture is a great posture at the end of your yoga workouts. Some people would suggest that you meditate in this position. That's useful if you are meditating on the concept of discomfort, doing the uncomfortable thing and working to get over some other uncomfortable thing in your life. If it's uncomfortable for you, it can train you to do the uncomfortable thing. If it is painful, and there's a difference between pain and discomfort. If it's painful, don't do it. If it's just uncomfortable, sit with that, literally. The trick to getting into lotus is actually flexibility, which is a little bit counterintuitive. We seem like what we're trying to do here is bind ourselves up in a tight little knot. And to actually make this easier, you want a certain level of flexibility, what I found in two different ways. So you want to work on your flexibility in the hamstrings, and the further flexible you can become in the hamstrings, and it helps to let the breath out when you do this, and not try to do this with lungs full of air the first time, but you want to try to get your nose to your knees or your eyeballs to your kneecaps. So you can always take a big deep breath, let it out, and fold over. Now it's going to take you a while to get to that step, but it helps to have that flexibility in the hamstrings. The other type of flexibility you want is in the inner thighs. So butterfly is great for this, and just holding this pose and working with the flexibility in the inner thigh, and as that relates to the hips, and you can just fold that over and just hang out there for a while. Work your way up to these kinds of flexibilities, but when you do, you're giving yourself what you need for lotus, because what we need for lotus is the ability to open up the hips like this and the flexibility in the hamstrings. So then to get there, and you don't have to be all the way there to start to work on getting into lotus, right? It's a practice, not a perfect. But what you want to do first is have one of your legs just kind of sitting there at roughly a little less than a 90-degree angle. Bring this ankle up, put it in the hip. Put it as far up in that hip as you can. And don't try to have the foot turned up at this point. Then take the other leg and bring that as far up into the other hip as you can. And you'll notice you get an automatic turn in the foot here. And then you can work on getting the turn in that foot. Now, sitting here in lotus, whether you're just going to sit, give it 5 or 10 breaths, whether you're going to go for levitation, something like that, whatever you're working with, allow it to be uncomfortable. Allow it to be. And if you notice that it's particularly uncomfortable, that you feel like your feet are just pushing down too hard on your thigh bones right there and getting really uncomfortable with this downward pressure here, take your hips and tilt them back a little bit. Tilt the bottom of the hips forward, right? Tip your tailbone forward so that you actually have a little bit of a curve. So instead of sitting up here, I want you to push that tailbone forward a little bit so that the top of the hips are going this movement. And that's going to make it surprisingly much more comfortable. So the reason that I like lotus, why do lotus? Lotus teaches us to do the uncomfortable thing. It's a very introspective posture because we're bound up into ourselves. But it's a posture that requires and benefits from a large amount of flexibility in the hamstrings and the inner thighs. And that dichotomy itself of needing flexibility in order to bind is a really interesting thing to contemplate, and that's what I like about Lotus. So how long should you sit in Lotus? How long would you like to sit in Lotus? There was a famous teacher who said, you know, if you can do 5 breaths, do 5. If you can do 10, do 10. You can choose to count by minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 60 seconds. It doesn't matter. As you practice, you can increase the amount of time that you can sit in Lotus. You can choose to meditate in Lotus. And depending on what you're meditating on, but it's not a requirement. It's just what benefits you and your practice in the moment. So that's a bit about Lotus position and what it's good for. You can go to my website and text me with questions. You can sign up for the newsletter and send me questions that way. And let me know how your practice is going, what's going on in your world, and ask away. Let me know how I can help.